In this video, we are going to look at how we can build a dynamic component that will extend itself based upon data instructions that we receive from the outside. So it's a little bit like a data-driven design, although from a purist perspective, it's not quite the same thing, although we will be sending data to the component, and based upon that data, the component will display the information for us. So in this case, it's just going to be a simple list with list items, but from a visualization perspective, I can very much use the same principles in displaying different data visualization based on the information that I show. The big question here, though, that we're going to be covering in this video is of how do I actually pass data to the component from a static perspective. So we're going to be building a basic repository component. We can get data from two kinds of sources, either from a database where this data is passed from the server to the client side and the client side reacts to it. But very often we have a static repository that we want to be able to set up. We don't need to go and hook it up to a database. We have various local JSON files, and I want to have the same component reused with different JSON files to render different repositories by sending that JSON onto the component. So in this video, we're just going to look at a very simple way on how can we start that operation by sending the JSON to the component. So for this example, I've created a data folder with a repo1 JSON file. It's an array of objects. Each object has a caption property and it has certain values, and this is our data structure for now. It's very simplistic, but later on we can start populating it with more properties that can affect how we render things. Just from a general perspective, how do I pass this to my component to use, or what are the strategies that I can use? So here's the component, and one of the things I can do is pass the repo JSON file on as a data dash attribute. So I can say data dash repo equals and then a path to where I would find that. So data / repo1.json. This means that I can have multiple versions of this component pointing to multiple versions of the data, and depending on what is in that data, the component will render the content. So we just have the one JSON file, so that's what we have for now. So on the component side of life, what we can do here is say const data equals this dot data set dot repo, but that's actually just the path. So we actually want the array of things, so that's not going to work. But I have the path, so I can go and fetch this, right? And I know it's JSON, so I can parse it in a way. So I can say, okay, well, const data is equal to await. So we're going to need to make this async for that to work. So I'm going to say await fetch, and the URL that I want to use is being passed to me via that data dash attribute. So I can say this dot dataset dot repo dot then I'm going to get a result from that fetch, and I want to transform that result to JSON. So now I have a data object that we fetched from the URL that was passed on to us and transformed it to JSON. So now that we have that, we can start doing more operations on that data. But for now, let's just say document.write data. So there we can see I have an array with 3 objects in it. So let's go and look at how we can now use this to build our UI. So I'm going to create a template within our components HTML And in this template, I'm going to say I want to have a list item, and this list item needs to contain a caption for me. So this is a very simplistic example for now. As we move through some scenarios, it can become a little bit more complex, but for now, just a stock standard li. And let's give this template, well, we don't actually need to give this template an ID because there's only going to be one for now. So within the component, I want to get a hold of that template. So I can say const template is equal to this dot query selector. Go fetch me the template, please. And now I can say, okay, okay, you know what we're going to need as well? We're going to need a UL. So there's the UL that we want to attach our items to. So let's go and fetch that quickly as well while we're at it. So const UL equals this dot query selector UL, and we can put that up there and fix that. So for let item of data, so we're just going to loop through the data, and each one of those objects has an item in it, and for each item we want to go and create a list item to add to the UL. So because we are going to be adding multiple items, the first thing we want to do is create a document fragment. So const fragment equals document.create document fragment. And then what we want to do here is say ul.append child fragment. So you would have seen this in one of the previous videos that I did. And now I know that each item has a property called caption, right? So we're looping through these items, and each one of them has a caption property on it. So I want to say, first of all, let's go and create the li. So const li equals document.create element of type li. Actually, that's not what we want to do. We're going to be working off of the template. You could technically use the li to start off with, but because in later videos we're actually going to have more complicated structures, we just start off using the template, sort of get used to it. Typically, if you're just talking about a single element, you probably don't want to use a template, but for this case, let's use it so we can get used to the idea at least. Right, so const li is equal to template dot content dot clone node true. So now we have a document fragment that contains our template. So let's call this li instance rather. Or we'll just call it instance. Then we can say instance dot children 0 is going to give us the li dot text content is equal to item dot caption. And then we need to append the instance to the fragment. So fragment dot append child instance. And now I can see there's the item. So if I go to my JSON and we change this to 10, or we change this to 20, or this we can change to hello world. I am actually not touching my HTML. I'm just changing the data structure, and based on the data structure, my UI is going to change, right? And so this is a very small step, but it's a very important step into understanding dynamic UI or data-driven architectures, where instead of building all of the static markup that I would have done, I could have easily just created a UL with some allies in it on a static HTML page, but it can never change with the data, right? So the principle here to understand is that we want to use dynamic UI based upon data that I send through to it, and I want the flexibility to be able to define a template for each item that we're going to be using. So let's just recap quickly. I have a data directory with a JSON file in it. In my component where I use it, I pass that URL on as a data dash attribute. In the component, when the component is created, we go and fetch the template from the component HTML, which we have defined. We go and get the UL that we want to append that to. We can also go and do that here, just to keep things together a bit. We go and use the URL that we passed on to the component with the fetch function. And when the fetch function returns us the content, we transform that content to JSON because we expect JSON back, right? Which means that I'm sitting here with a JSON object. You can consider that like a dictionary. Then we loop through that array, create an instance from the template, go and set the content of the items inside that instance, and then ultimately we add all the items we created to the parent UL. So now if I wanted to add more items, I can very easily do that without changing any of the HTML, and we can even go and remove some items, and we never have to go and bother touching the HTML again. So dynamic UI via passing it onto the component through a data dash attribute. So when we create repository components, this is a really easy way for us to build different types of repositories, send the data to the component, and have the component render the items for us quick and easy.